Welcome in to another edition of the Cubs Now podcast. Lance Brozdowski alongside Alex Cohen. And who do we have with us today? It's the man of the hour, the man that I'm very glad took a bunch of pitching, because I think I've been ragging on you for the last couple of years, Mr. Dan Kantrovitz, VP of Scouting of the Cubs, to take pitching, and you did it, man. So I'm going to stand up. I can't stand up on my chair here, but round
I'm going to give you a golf clap.
You guys took pitching. Talk to me about the plan heading into the draft. How confident were you you'd come out of it with this many pitchers? You guys took 11 arms in your first 13 picks.
Yeah, thanks for acknowledging that. I think we definitely, accomplished the first part of the plan. Now they have to go out and pitch well. But yeah, I think going into it, we thought we didn't put a specific number on it, but we knew that we were going to go in with like a pretty heavily skewed draft towards pitching. And I think like going into it, you don't exactly know which round that's going to be. So there's still some time to kind of read and react during the draft. But I think Cade was definitely a target for us. We felt like he fit right into that part of the draft, and the mid-20s where we picked, and we're happy he was there when we got him. And then with the next two picks, there ended up just being two bats that we're really high on, and we didn't want to pass up. But then, as you noted, following that, it was just a hard run on pitching right after that.
Cade Townsend was a fascinating arm. I found the back half of that first round with all the college pitchers somewhat in the same tier, so to speak. Maybe the values you guys had internally weren't dramatically different. What was it about Cade that maybe pushed him to the top of your board at the time he was picked at 23?
Yeah, we did a lot of work on Cade. I mean, just starting from the combine, sitting down with him, doing a lot of background work, talking to his coaches, talking to his teammates, people that played with him over the course of the years. And then he sat down with a few of our folks in pitching. And so we kind of approached it from a lot of different angles. And, I think at the end of the day, just his, the arm talent is pretty unique. His capacity for spin, his ability to, probably eventually form a few different shapes with his force, with his heater. We think there's a lot there to work with. And I think he's just, at the end of the day, probably the best fit for our system out of that group that you mentioned. So we're happy to have him. And in fact, he's going to make a trip to Wrigley here in the next few weeks to kind of go through the official signing process and take in a game.
Dan, I'm going to look at things on the personal side of the draft. Now, there's obviously two sides to every phone call. There's the draft pick who's receiving the call, and then there's the scouting department. There's the GM who's making the call. What's it like being on that side of it, making the call that changes these young men's lives forever?
No doubt that's the best part of the day. I mean, during the draft, you get to, call them and say, Cade, you're our guy. And a lot of times they're shocked, but then sometimes they kind of know that call's coming just through their agent and just kind of how it works these days. But that's definitely the best part of it. And, stepping back for just big picture, the impact that we have on kids' lives and families' lives, it's not lost on us. And I think that's definitely the most exciting part of the day during the draft is kind of hearing that on the other end of the call. And you just get such varying responses too. And people are always doing different things. Sometimes they're out golfing, sometimes they're with their family, sometimes they have it turned off, and it's just, but it's that's absolutely the most rewarding part of the job.
Sometimes they're lifting like Matt Shaw was. He was in the gym getting some reps in.
Exactly.
So,
good memory. Yeah.
This is a blur for these players. Take us through the process when it comes to getting drafted, signing, going down to Arizona. What does the first week or two look like for these players and essentially their syllabus leak when it comes to being a professional baseball player?
Yeah, and that's the number one question they ask us at the draft combine. We sit down with a couple hundred players, and undoubtedly they ask us the exact same question. What does it look like right the minute I get drafted? And it's different for everybody. It's case dependent. In the case of a pitcher, there's a few variables. One, has he been throwing? Is he ramped up? Are there some injuries, some health concerns to sort through first? But I guess like on the surface, if you're just talking about a player that's coming in, like we'll take Cade, for example. He's, I wouldn't say it's a low mileage arm, but, he had a couple setbacks this year on the health side early on to the point where like he's actually throwing now. He's throwing bullpens. In fact, I think he's probably going to throw a pen when he gets to Wrigley in a few weeks. Just to, and so he's But like, is he going to throw in games this summer? Highly unlikely. And then it's all with an eye towards next spring, towards getting these guys sort of ramped up and ready to go for spring training, so they can go out and shoulder a full workload of innings. But it really runs the gamut based on their workload, their health situation, and and sometimes their age, and there's some other factors that play into it. But it's a case dependent for sure.
The second and third round picks you grabbed, Caden Sorrell from Texas A&M and Miles Bailey from Florida State. I would say from like a fingerprint standpoint, they're very different hitters than you guys have drafted in the past. Both of them come with a bit more swing and miss, but also like really nice top and exit velocities, really fun packages of players. But if I look back to your last couple drafts, it almost seems to me like you guys definitely prioritize like the King Kepleys of the world, or the combination of hit tool pop and a Matt Shaw, something along those lines. Even Ethan Conrad's probably in that same idea of like zone control, but also hits the ball hard. You guys almost went, you could correct me wrong, it feels like you accepted a little more risk perhaps in those bats, but wanted to maybe have the access to upper level reward on both of these guys. I mean, Miles Bailey can project for 30, 35 homers in the bigs if you really want to push it. And Sorrell is kind of like a volatile outfielder that I could definitely see hitting top-end outcomes. So those guys are a bit different than historically where you've gone. Talk to me about your evaluation process and maybe how it was different from prior years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Lance, you always end up knowing our type before we know our type. And
it's a compliment.
Yeah. So with the hitters, I think there's everybody is going to be a little bit different, and I think with like Caden, you try to weigh his contribution on the bases. He can run. His contribution in center field. He's got a plus arm, and he's got plus power, and so then maybe you're a little bit more forgiving with a little bit some swing and miss that might be there. In the case of Miles, I mean, he's got the type of power that we don't have access to every year in the draft, especially from a college player. And I think, he had an opportunity to go back to Florida State. Obviously, he had the injury situation with the ankle early on. But if this guy's healthy all year long, he's hitting 30 plus home runs and, in the conversation for one of the best hitters in the country. So really happy to have access to a bat like that. And when you're talking about the third round, you mentioned the risk reward. I think you're definitely willing to swallow a little bit more risk to try to access that reward. The later you go down the draft.
Yeah, I mean, talk about some of the arms that you went after too. You accepted a bit of injury risk in some of the guys. Morton is one that's down right now. Mariano is a fascinating one, not on the injury side, but more so from like a velo projection standpoint. He's a guy that I imagine you guys want to try to add some velocity to. So again, I love that you took a bunch of arms, but talk to me about the puzzle that it was maybe combining some of these different types of arms to get you to which you could almost call like a portfolio, if you want to use that word, that you're very confident will produce multiple major league arms out of.
Yeah, hopefully they produce multiple major league arms. I think when you think of like a portfolio approach, it's really easiest to just look at that kind of in retrospect, honestly, because what we don't want to do is go in and take 15 pitchers that are all going to end up having surgery, within a week or two of the draft, right? That'd be on the extreme end. It's also highly unlikely, just given where the state of college baseball is in the draft, that we're going to take 15 arms that are all ready to go out and just throw immediately. So there's going to be some kind of in between there, right? Some of these guys are going to have different injuries, and I think as long as you're avoiding the extremes there, you should be okay from like a player development standpoint. There's always the possibility that if you do take too many pitchers that aren't able to throw for whatever reason, health. Whether it's health or what have you, you can always end up signing some pitchers post-draft too, which, we did a little bit. But at the same time, I think, a guy like Isaac Morton, he's somebody that probably would have, the way our calculus works is, he has to have surgery immediately. But at the same time, I think had he been healthy all year, he probably would have gone a little bit higher in the draft. So you want to make sure that that's part of the thinking also. You mentioned a guy like Mariano. He showed up at our workout 160 pounds, dripping wet. And, we think there's a lot of just room to just.
Sorry, I had to. Low hanging fruit.
I'm not going to go there. We think there's a lot of room for him to probably add some weight as it gets under the umbrella of our high performance group. And from there, I think it's a situation where, I think there's a lot of arms that, were intriguing to us for a number of different reasons, whether it's just the ability to add some weight from a high performance standpoint, whether that's to work with our pitching guys and add some velocity, whether that's to get in the pitch lab and work with like their spin capacity. But everybody's got kind of a different story and a different situation.
I just like how you got Lance, the former finance guy, talking about portfolios. That was fun.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. Obviously, the draft has come and gone. Your job isn't finished. You are not taking a vacation right now. Take us through what the next week to a month, 2 months looks like for you. Are you on to 2027?
Yeah, we're on to 2027 at this point. We've got a few of our folks out in the Cape Cod League scouting arms. We've got kind of the circuit starting with the East Coast Pro Showcase event coming up in Alabama in a couple of days, followed by the Area Code event, which showcases the top high school kids in the country. So really the scouting end of it never stops. We're also running a department and, we've got 30 plus people where, there's just standard administrative things to take care of at this point. And then obviously kind of looming over us is the trade deadline as well.
You brought it up. I'm going to touch upon it. The trade deadline is a bittersweet time for somebody in your position, especially with the Chicago Cubs, who are a competitive team looking to win a World Series. The good news is the Chicago Cubs are good. The bad news is they might be trading away players that you've gotten to know and relationships with, and it's not just the top prospect in the organization. It's the Christian Franklins, it's the Ryan Gallaghers. I'm just going back to last year, who was traded during the trade deadline. What does this week mean to you? Like, talk about the bittersweet feelings that you feel during a week like this.
Yeah, I think on one hand, we put so much time, usually over a course of a number of years, into cultivating relationships with these kids, with their families. So when somebody is traded, yeah, I think there's an emotion there that, we all feel, our area scouts all the way up to me, in terms of just, okay, that person's no longer part of our family. But at the same time, I think everybody, the players included, understand sort of where things are at from a business standpoint. Just the fact that, we might give Jed and Carter, more flexibility to improve our big league team. That actually makes all of us feel really good too. So, I don't think, I think it's kind of a win-win situation when that happens. I think when we're in a position where we've got, a strong major league club, I think it's any opportunity that we can to make it better, however we can, we're all in.
How valuable is it for you guys to update the names that maybe you've spent, every single year you have this giant pool of names you're sorting through in the draft. As you get to the deadline, what are the conversations like between Jed Carter and yourself, or even just Jed Carter and your department generally, in terms of evaluating the guys that you looked at maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, or even 5 to 10 years ago, and updating what you thought about the player then, what you think about the player now, and perhaps how that influences your guys' valuations and whether a trade is fair or not? I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I'm just wondering, like, it feels to me like a lot of people maybe perceive you guys as like stopping down and moving to the next draft, but that work you do is like in your guys' internals for a really long period of time. How important and essential is that to making correct decisions at the deadline?
Yeah, I think what's really important there is, Jed and Carter are integrally involved in our draft process, obviously, and every part of it, from draft meetings leading up to the draft, to the process, to the decision making. So it's not the names that we're talking about. It's not like we have a monopoly on that information. They know it. Our pro staff knows it. Our R&D staff knows it. So it's rare now where there's going to be something where, they just a piece of information that might be eluding them. I think there are cases where, it's like, hey, we'll talk like, hey, why did this guy slide in the draft? Is there something we don't know? He's somebody that we might be targeting in this deal. Things like that might pop up. But it's pretty streamlined. The reports that we submit on the amateur side for the draft, end up, those are kind of living, breathing things. They get updated by our player development staff. and then our pro scouts. And so any kind of assessment or evaluation that we're going to make, I think everybody's pretty much in the know. And, because our draft process is so collaborative between our front office, between player development, between research and development, they're familiar with the names. So it's rare that, I think they're going to need too much help from the scouting side this time of year.
Dan, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We really appreciate your time as always. You've given us more than enough over the last couple weeks, giving us a tour, talking pre-draft, now post-draft, and we're excited to do it all again next year and run into you this offseason and elsewhere.
Take some R&R, get some rest.
Get some sleep. You got rain down today in the Cape, it sounds, so there you go. Get some 10 hours of sleep in.
Thanks, Lance. Thanks, Alex. Talk to you guys soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Huge thank you to Dan Kantrovitz for joining us here on the Cubs Now podcast. We'll take a quick break after it. We will talk deadline with me and Alex. Welcome back to the Cubs Now podcast. Another huge thank you to Dan Kantrovitz for taking the time, not just today as we talked to him, but throughout the last couple of weeks. He's always super amenable with how much he wants to chat with us, and I really enjoy his insights. So fun conversation there. We want to get into some deadline stuff before we eventually preview the deadline, hopefully coming up here. This is a big one. Again, Monday.
Huge. You
got a game against the Dodgers, 7:05 start. We'll be on the air 6 p.m. Central Time with our pregame show. But likely if something happens, you never know. Might come on a little bit early, especially if they go get...
Might go into the office early.
Yeah, maybe if they get a Tarek Skubal. We'll talk about him in a second. You never know. Jeff Passan put out a piece, Alex, and it wasn't reported that the Cubs were linked to either him or Mason Miller, which disappointed me a little. I shed a tear. But we'll talk about that in a second. We got to get some news first. Jamison Tyone designated for assignment after, unfortunately, he's given up the long ball continually in pretty much every start that he's had this season. One of the highest homer per nine rates in all of Major League Baseball. It's been a struggle for him this year. It's also a contract year. He's DFA'd. I believe he's still in that cycle right now. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, you understand where he's gone. But he will likely, I'm not entirely sure on some of the specifics here, but if you get DFA'd, I don't think he would accept an assignment to AAA, so probably either elect free agency and then be able to play on the minimum for another team, and the Cubs will owe the salary and such. But I think the big thing, Alex, here is he's a great dude, and I think the outpouring of support you heard from Ian Happ and Nico Horner on 670 The Score
Dansby Swanson
and elsewhere,
as well.
Dansby Swanson, is just the impact he had on the clubhouse. So this is just one of those baseball decisions on this team needs to get better. He wasn't doing it. If you move him to the pen and he gains 2 ticks, he's 93-4, which really isn't a reliever in the modern game unless you're Hobie Milner throwing from all the way out the first base side. Disappointing to see him go, but I think this is kind of like hey, we're trying to win something big here. And I don't know if they were willing to kind of take the next couple months to figure out what was up with J-Mo and to correct him to get him right.
Yeah,
it's a bummer.
I think Craig Counsell hit the nail on the head. I mean, it was obviously very disappointing. And even though you DFA Jamison Tyone, you look back to his tenure with the Cubs, 2024, really, really good.
Yeah.
Helped build the foundation of this Cubs team. If you talk to Cade Horton, Justin Steele, Ben Brown, they will say during that year and end 2025, J-Mo was so integral to their success and really being a part of the big leagues and this big league team. 2025, they don't get to where they are in 2025 without him, especially in the playoffs. So I think that you can be you can remember Jamison Tyone fondly, but also accept that in 2026, the production wasn't there, and if the production's not there, you have to go get somebody else.
No doubt. And maybe that someone else is Tarek Skubal, who is obviously the white whale on the market for a variety of teams. He had his last start Wednesday. I think he went 6 2/3, was pulled in the middle of that inning, and the bullpen actually ended up, I believe, tying the game. I don't know what the result was of it, but regardless, this seemed to me like he knows he's getting traded. We had some weird rumors over the last couple weeks. The Tigers have been playing well. Would they actually get it done? There was another one where it was like they want to trade Skubal, but they don't know if they can, which didn't make any sense at all to me.
They can. They can do whatever they want.
I will be absolutely stunned if he's not another jersey after 5 p.m., 6 p.m. Central Time Monday. There's no way
at this point, I would agree with you. I mean, they DFA his personal catcher. He has the standing ovation after the 1,000th K, and then his start in Detroit. It made it seem like he is going to be traded and wearing another uniform next week and making his next start somewhere else. I could be shocked. Baseball does some really surprising things. I was about 50-50 on whether Skubal was getting traded up until this week. Now, I don't know if I'm 99% to 1 like Lance is, but I think he gets traded.
Yeah, I'm like 96 to 99%. I'd be shocked. If the Tigers, it's an introspection moment for their ownership. It's like they think they can go to the table with $450 million to pay him, then you keep him. But if you think the contract's going to be $390 to $400, like you're just going to get outbid.
And there's spending tendencies to this point in the entire history of their organization. They have not done that, so that would buck an entire organizational trend if they do re-sign Skubal, which I just don't think they're going to do.
And he is a very good opportunity for them to retool on the pitching side, the Tigers, because they don't really have a lot of depth. Casey Mize is also a free agent at the end of the year. To me, it's kind of a purge. Do we have a rough percent on the Cubs' chances here? Jim Bowden went on foul territory and said the Brewers were the favorite, which is not something that I necessarily agree with, but of course he does great reporting and obviously getting this from somewhere. My favorite right now, I'm just taking the Dodgers and throwing him out. He's probably going to be a Dodger. It's just he's going to have to suck it up because they do this all the time. They have the deepest farm system. They will be hurt the least by trading away from their strengths in order to get him. But if you remove that from the equation, Alex, to me, I actually think the Braves have the best shot.
I'm right there with you. I agree with you.
And it's primarily because of the point that the Tigers need to retool on pitching. There was reports a couple weeks ago from Rosenthal and I believe Passan saying that they wanted young, controllable pitching. I think the Braves have a lot of that. They have a surplus of these AAA arms that are, I would say, all in a very similar tier, from Didier Fuentes to A.J. Smith-Shawver to J.R. Ritchie. The Tigers could basically go in and take their pick of one or two of those guys, and I think that would be equally as competitive.
That would be enough.
I
mean, if they went with Fuentes, who's, you look at the fastball, it's 98 to 101. A.J. Smith-Shawver, who's had a lot of big league success, is working his way back from an injury. If you're looking at organizations pitching-wise that are set up to trade for Tarik Skubal, you look at 2-3 arms, it's the Braves to me. I would agree with you. You look at the Brewers. I mean, obviously they have a lot of talent when it comes to that as well. I just think the Braves are more well-positioned to do it.
Yeah, the Brewers are going to have to convince the Tigers to take bats in order to get this done. They have one arm that I think would probably be on the chopping block.
Logan Henderson? Or
perhaps. I think Bishop Letson is a more interesting name. He's kind of this like lower-level minors guy that's, I think, just got up to AA, who's been really good for them. That's the kind of arm they could go after.
But the bat they would have to take would either be like Pratt or Lara or something.
Yeah, who are already contract guys. So it's a weirder situation. Maybe the Tigers like the fact it's cost-controlled. We're not talking about the Cubs here because I think that I'm surprised, Alex, at the reporting, at least not linking the Cubs to this conversation from Jeff Passan in his recent piece, where they kind of ranked all the free agents and he gave, word associations like Skubal, who are the teams that are most likely. This, to me, Skubal on the Cubs makes the Cubs better than he makes any other team by, partially because they're one of the only, I think, top 8 teams from playoff odds right now that have like a sub 3-ish WAR projection on their starting pitchers. Like, this is the guy you go in on because it's a clear need for the
I think
Cubs.
if he goes to an AL team, it would really help the Rays because the AL is completely up for grabs this year, and it might put the Rays over the top.
But the Rays' foundation of pitching right now
is already really
probably
good.
Stronger than you could argue the Cubs is presently without Cabrera.
But that's also a blessing and a curse to the Cubs because if the Tigers are looking for controllable starting pitching, who are you dealing for, Skubal? Are you dealing Javier Assad, Jackson Wiggins? Like, what is the price? And I'm not sure that the Cubs have all the reinforcements from the pitching side to go get a guy like Skubal.
I agree. Yeah, that's probably the hesitancy and maybe why Passan isn't linking it to him. But I'm never going to count it out. Even if it's a low probability, that would be something we pop champagne for in these studios if he is traded.
We'd be popping bottles.
That'd be unbelievable. I enjoyed this too from Russ Dorsey. Does great work in the Chicago area. We see him in the clubhouse. Great dude. He mentioned that the Reed Detmer's interest, the White Sox, basically both the Chicago teams are interested, which makes a lot of sense. This lines up with other reporting we've seen. Detmer's is a controlled pitcher. I do think if the Cubs are going to give up some of those top-end pieces, you think of a Hartshorn or a Jefferson Rojas and Owen Ayers are the first 3 that kind of come to mind that seem to have the most interest in the market from the people I've talked to as well, that you'd want to do it for controllable pitching. But Alex, my point, whenever we hit the deadline, we did this last year with Joe Ryan, we go, it'd be great. If I'm going to trade my top prospects, I want controllable pitching. And then the time window shrinks, you have a deadline, and it just gets pushed back.
And they do it in December.
We see this continually with all these transactions. Shane Baz, I think about. My escaping. Edward Cabrera is another one. So I think these controllable pieces to be moved, I think of him, I think of Soriano.
Emerson
I even think of Joe Ryan, who has one more year. Emerson Hancock's another good one. I think Hancock perhaps has the most pressure to be traded because of how the Mariners are constructed.
Yeah.
I still am a little skeptical it gets done, but I think it's more rental path for the Cubs than it is controllable. Do you agree?
I would agree just because of the pattern of the MLB trade deadline, because controllable arms don't get moved in July, they get moved in December. If you look at where the Cubs are at right now, Shota Imanaga, free agent at the end of the year. Jameson Taillon just got DFA'd. Matthew Boyd, I believe he is either a free agent or he has some sort of option as well. So you have the opportunity to replace 2 to 3 pitchers. you're going to have to do it for a controllable arm. I think they will go rental. It won't be like the deeper price pocket that the Cubs would have to do for a controllable arm. Kevin Gausman, Freddie Peralta seems more likely to me, but if they're going to go the controllable arm route, Reed Detmers, Jose Soriano, Emerson Hancock, Logan Webb, and Joe Ryan. You get one of those, you're in business.
Absolutely, yeah. Matt Boyd is a mutual for next year at $15 million.
Yeah.
Mutuals is generally not picked up. That seems like in a price point that maybe it does make sense for both teams. We'll see how that
Sandy Alcantara as well.
Sandy Alcantara is another great one as
yeah.
well. So, yeah, we got one more, a producer here. DJ, Derek Jensen, does a great job for us. Guess that player. You're going to dominate me at these. I don't even know if I can see.
I can't see the year. What year is it for the Cubs?
All right, so we got Orioles to Mets to Dodgers.
I already
to
know
Red
what this
Sox.
is. Yeah, I know it is. It's Justin Turner.
Just how does he know?
It's Justin Turner. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like you need a handicap. We need like a blindfold where Alex puts on a blindfold and I get 10 seconds with
It's Justin Turner.
I'm terrible at these. I was gonna guess like Trent Thornton because I saw
not
Mariners
far
and
because
Cubs,
you got the Mariners
but I was like, there's
and
no
Toronto,
way Trent Thornton was on all those other teams. So, anyways, yeah, this is some good stuff. Again, thank you to Dan Kantrovitz for taking the time here on the Cubs Now podcast and deadline chatter as well. The deadline is coming up. We'll have you covered here on Marquee Sports Network. Stick with us. Thanks for joining us as always.